Family called me the disappointment for 10 years. Then sister's husband begged me for a job. For a decade, that was my identity at every holiday dinner, every birthday, every strained phone call. I was Emma, the one who walked away from a full scholarship to law school to pursue a hobby, which is what my mother called my graphic design business. My older sister, Jessica, was the golden child. She did everything right, graduated with a business degree, married Richard, a man whose teeth were as white as his portfolio was strong, and produced 2 perfect children who never seemed to cry. They were the family's success story, the shiny centerpiece on the dining room table. I was the cracked plate they kept in the back of the cupboard. For 10 years, they called me the disappointment, and my sister's husband begged me for a job. They never saw my design business as real. If they underestimated me, wait until they see what I did. Subscribe and leave a like for my story. The comparisons were constant and brutal. At Christmas, Jessica and Richard would gift my parents a cruise to the Bahamas. I would give them a custom-framed photo collage of family memories, and my mother would smile thinly and say, "Oh, that's creative, dear." When Richard's finance company had a record quarter, my father would clap him on the back and talk about it for weeks. When I landed my first major client, a contract worth $50,000, my father listened for a moment and then asked if I was putting enough away for retirement because the art world is so fickle. They didn't see my hard work, only my deviation from the path they had chosen for me. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner a few years ago. It was the peak of their condescension. Richard was holding court at the head of the table, talking about the new Mercedes he'd just bought for Jessica. "It's the safest model on the market," he said, looking at my father, Robert, for approval. "Only the best for my family." My mother was practically glowing. Later, when I was helping clear the dishes, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Emma," she said, her voice a low, concerned whisper, "your Honda is almost 15 years old. Don't you think it's time you got a real job so you can afford something safe?" I just stared at her, the plate in my hand suddenly feeling very heavy. A real job. As if the 70 hours a week I poured into my own business were some childish game. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less trendy part of the city. The paint was peeling in the hallway, and the upstairs neighbor practiced the drums at odd hours, but it was my sanctuary. I had built my company, Pixel Perfect Designs, from nothing. I started with a used laptop on my rickety kitchen table, taking any gig I could find. Now I had a small office downtown and 2 employees. We weren't a Fortune 500 company, but we were respected in our field, and more importantly, we were profitable. I paid my bills, saved my money, and I was proud of what I had accomplished, even if my family wasn't. My father, Robert, wasn't always so dismissive. Before he got swept up in Richard's world of money and status, he used to have these simple sayings. One of them stuck with me, something he said when I was a teenager struggling with a school project. "You can build a house on sand, Emma," he'd told me, "but don't be surprised when the tide comes in." At the time, I didn't think much of it. But as the years went on and I watched the glittering facade of Jessica and Richard's life, I thought about that phrase more and more. Their success seemed so effortless, so perfect. It was a mansion built right on the water's edge. Their life was a performance, and Instagram was their stage. Photos from skiing trips in Aspen, summer weekends in the Hamptons, charity galas where Jessica wore $5,000 dresses. My mother kept a digital photo frame in the living room that cycled through these pictures. "Look at them," she'd say to visitors. "They're just so happy." I never saw pictures of Richard working late into the night, or of Jessica looking exhausted from keeping up appearances. I only saw the curated perfection. My own life, with its messy realities and small, hard-won victories, couldn't compete with that. The last time I spoke to Jessica before everything changed, she called to tell me they were buying a lake house. "It's just a little something to get away from the city on weekends," she said, her voice dripping with casual wealth. "You should come up sometime, Emma. It might inspire some of your little drawings." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I congratulated her, said it sounded lovely, and hung up the phone. I sat in my quiet office, the city lights twinkling outside my window, and felt a familiar wave of loneliness wash over me. I was an island, and my family was a continent I could see but never reach. But I kept working. I poured my frustration and my ambition into my designs. I stayed late, networked, and took calculated risks. My company started landing bigger and bigger clients. A tech startup, a national beverage brand, a boutique hotel chain. My income grew steadily, then sharply. I didn't buy a Mercedes or a lake house. I invested back into my business and bought my small apartment outright. I was building my house on solid rock, brick by painstaking brick, far from the water's edge. And I remembered my father's words. Their beautiful house was built on sand, and I could hear the tide starting to roll in, even if they couldn't. I just didn't realize how fast it was coming, or that I would be the one they'd expect to save them when it hit. The first crack in their perfect facade appeared not with a bang, but with a quiet email. It was from an old colleague, a woman named Angela who ran a digital marketing agency that sometimes collaborated with mine. Her email was short. Hey Emma, just saw an industry report on market volatility. Heard some whispers about Richard's investment firm, Evans Capital. Hope all is well. I stared at the words for a long time. Whispers. In Richard's world, whispers were like tremors before an earthquake. I thanked Angela for the heads up and told her everything was fine, a lie that felt slick and unfamiliar on my tongue. I tried to ignore it, but the thought was a splinter under my skin. Out of a morbid curiosity I couldn't control, I started paying closer attention to Jessica's Instagram. For the next few weeks, her posts became almost frantic. It was a performance of extreme wealth. One day it was a new diamond tennis bracelet from Richard, captioned, "Just because it's Tuesday." The next it was a weekend trip to New York on a private jet, the champagne glasses perfectly angled to catch the light. It was too much, too loud. It wasn't the casual, effortless bragging of the past. This felt desperate, like someone shouting, "We're fine, we're more than fine," into a gathering storm. Her followers ate it up, but I saw the strain behind the posed smiles. I saw the house of sand getting frantically reinforced with more sand. A month later, my mother called. Her tone was different, stripped of its usual condescending pity for me. It was replaced with a brittle cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge. She asked about my business, a topic she usually avoided like the plague. "So, Pixel Perfect Designs," she said, stumbling over the name. "That's going well, is it? You're stable." I told her things were great, that we'd just signed a major contract with a hotel group. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear," she said, but her voice was distant. Then came the real reason for her call. "Jessica and Richard are thinking of renovating the lake house. A whole new wing. Richard says it's important to keep investing in assets." She paused. "He's so smart with money. Just so smart. Even when the economy is tricky." She was fishing, trying to convince herself as much as me. She needed me to validate the image, to agree that everything was perfect. I just said, "That's nice, Mom," and let the silence hang between us. The confirmation that the whispers were real came 2 weeks after that call. I was at a coffee shop downtown called The Daily Grind, waiting for a client. I was sitting near the window when I saw him. Richard. He was standing on the sidewalk, his back to me, screaming into his phone. It was a cold day, but sweat was visible on his brow. His usually perfect hair was a mess, and his expensive Tom Ford suit looked rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. I couldn't hear all the words, but I caught phrases. "What do you mean, liquidate?" And "That's impossible. The funds are secured." And the most telling one, "You can't pull out now, Kenneth, you can't." He ended the call and slammed his fist against the brick wall of the building, a single, violent motion of pure rage and panic. Then he just stood there, his shoulders slumped, his head down. The master of the universe looked like a broken man. He looked small. I ducked my head down, my heart pounding, hoping he wouldn't turn around and see me. He eventually hailed a cab and disappeared into traffic. I sat there for 10 minutes, my coffee growing cold. That image was burned into my mind. The fist against the wall, the slumped shoulders. This was it. This was the tide. It wasn't just coming in. It was starting to pull the foundations out from under their beautiful, glittering house. I thought about my little 2-bedroom apartment, the one my mother thought was so sad. I thought about my company, built slowly over 10 years with my own money and my own sweat. It wasn't a mansion on the beach. It was a small, sturdy lighthouse on a cliff, and I had built it on solid rock. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like the disappointment. I felt like the survivor. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that soon they would be looking for a lighthouse to guide them through the storm. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of a design review with my team, projecting a new logo concept onto the wall, when my phone buzzed on the conference table. It was Jessica. I almost let it go to voicemail. Her calls were usually monologues about her perfect life that left me feeling drained, but something made me pick it up. "I need to take this," I said to my team. 5 minutes. I stepped into the hallway, the familiar scent of old coffee and printing ink in the air. "Jessica, is everything okay?" The sound that came back wasn't my sister's usual breezy, confident tone. It was a choked, ragged sob. "Emma," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Emma, it's all gone." I leaned against the wall, my own breath catching in my throat. "What's gone? Jessica, talk to me. What happened?" "The company!" she cried, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic. "Evans Capital. It's gone. The investors pulled out. There was an investigation. Fraud, Emma. They're saying he committed fraud." Her voice dropped to a horrified whisper. "We lost everything. The house, the lake house, the cars, my jewelry. The bank froze all our accounts this morning. We have nothing." I was silent. I pictured the Mercedes, the $5,000 dresses, the trips to Aspen. All of it, just smoke. A part of me, a small, dark, and petty part that I was ashamed of, felt a surge of triumph. For a decade, they had made me feel worthless, and now their entire world had evaporated overnight. "Emma, are you there?" Jessica's voice was pleading now, stripped of all its superiority. She sounded like she did when we were kids and she'd scraped her knee, looking to me to make it better. "I'm here," I said, my voice flat. "Where are you?" We're at a friend's house. We can't stay here long." "Emma." She hesitated, and I could hear Richard muttering something angrily in the background. "We need help." "What kind of help?" I asked, already knowing the answer. They needed money. They needed a place to stay. They were coming to the disappointment, the cracked plate, because all their other fine china friends had suddenly vanished. "We need—" "Oh, God, this is so embarrassing," she sobbed. "We need somewhere to live, just for a little while, until we can get back on our feet." I thought of my small 2-bedroom apartment, the one my mother had pitied me for. The spare room was my home office, crammed with my equipment. There was barely enough space for me, let alone a family of 4 used to a mansion. Then came the blow that knocked the air out of my lungs. "And Richard?" Jessica's voice was barely audible. "He needs a job. He can't get anything in finance now. His name is toxic. He'll do anything." I waited. The silence stretched. I knew what was coming. I could feel it. A cold, heavy certainty. "He was wondering," Jessica said, her voice trembling with the sheer humiliation of it all. "He was wondering if Pixel Perfect Designs might have an opening for anything. An administrative role, a project manager. He's really good with numbers and strategy." I almost laughed. Richard, the man who called my business a hobby, who once asked me if I made enough to afford real health insurance, was now begging me, Emma, for a job. The tide hadn't just come in. It had washed away their entire world, leaving them shivering and exposed on the shore. And I remembered my father's words, so clearly it was as if he were standing next to me. "You can build a house on sand, Emma," he had said, "but don't be surprised when the tide comes in." Their mansion was gone. And they were standing in front of my little lighthouse on the cliff, asking for shelter. "Emma, please," Jessica begged, her voice raw. "You're my sister. Your family. You're all we have left." For 10 years, I was only family when it was convenient for them to have a cautionary tale at the dinner table. Now, in their desperation, I was their last hope. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. The power had shifted so completely, so suddenly, it was dizzying. I held the fate of the golden child, and her master of the universe husband in my hands. I could save them, or I could watch them drown. I need to think, I said finally, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. I'll call you back. I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I stood in the hallway of the company I had built from scratch, my heart pounding a strange, uneven rhythm, a mix of pity, rage, and a terrifying sense of justice. For the first time in my life, I was the one with all the power, and I had no idea what to do with it. I walked back into the conference room, my team's expectant faces turning towards me. The vibrant logo on the screen seemed to mock me, a symbol of the order and success I had built, while my family's world was collapsing into chaos. I tried to smile. Sorry about that. Family stuff. My voice was steady, a mask of professionalism I had perfected over the years. We finished the review and I approved the final design, but my mind was a million miles away, stuck in that hallway with the ghost of my sister's sobs. I spent the rest of the afternoon on autopilot, answering emails and signing invoices with a hand that felt disconnected from my body. I was the one they ran to. After a decade of being treated like a regrettable life choice, I was suddenly their only port in a storm. The thought was both bitter and intoxicating. I could say no. I could tell them to figure it out themselves, just like I had. I could finally let them feel the cold indifference they had shown me for 10 years. The idea was tempting. It was a dark, satisfying fantasy. My phone buzzed again just as I was packing up to leave. This time, it was my mother, Carol. I knew this call was coming. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a deep breath to brace myself. Emma, thank God. I just spoke to Jessica. Her voice was a high-pitched, frantic mess. There was no hello, no, how are you? It's a nightmare, a complete nightmare, that poor girl. And Richard. They're practically on the street, you have to help them. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Mom, calm down, I said, my tone cooler than I intended. Calm down? How can I calm down? Your sister has nothing. Her children are going to be homeless. You have that spare room in your apartment, don't you? They can stay with you. They need to stay with you. She was already arranging their lives in my space, a space she had once called a bit sad. It's my office, Mom. It's full of equipment. My entire business runs out of that room, I said, my patience fraying. Well, move it, she snapped. This is your sister we're talking about. Your family. You have no idea what she's going through. You need to put your little business aside for a moment and be there for her. My little business. Even now, with that little business being their only lifeline, she couldn't help but diminish it. The rage that had been simmering inside me for years suddenly boiled over, but it came out as ice. My little business is the only reason you're calling me for help instead of the other way around, I said quietly. Jessica and Richard spent 10 years looking down on me, and you and Dad cheered them on. Now their world has fallen apart and I'm expected to just drop everything and fix it? There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. That is a horrible thing to say, Emma, Carol whispered, her voice full of theatrical hurt. This isn't about the past. This is about family helping family in a crisis. It's always about the past, Mom, I replied. I'll think about it. I'll call Jessica. I hung up before she could argue further. I stood in my empty office, the city lights beginning to sparkle outside. I thought of my father's words again, that old saying about the house built on sand. I had watched them build that glittering mansion, so proud, so certain of its foundations. I remembered the condescending looks, the pitying smiles. I remembered being the family's secret shame. And now, as my mother's words echoed in my head, I knew what I had to do. Helping them wasn't enough. Saying no wasn't enough. This was an opportunity, not just for justice, but for clarity. They were going to live in my world now. They were going to learn, up close, what it took to build a house on solid rock. I took the subway home, walking the 3 blocks from the station to my building. I looked up at my window on the 3rd floor. It was small, unassuming, nothing like their former mansion with its manicured lawns. But it was paid for. It was mine. Inside, I made myself a simple dinner and sat at my rickety kitchen table, the same one where Pixel Perfect Designs was born. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Jessica's number. She answered on the first ring. Emma? Her voice was a tiny, hopeful thread. I've thought about it, I said, keeping my voice even and professional, the same tone I used with a difficult client. You can stay with me. All of you. A wave of relieved sobs came through the phone. Oh, Emma, thank you. Thank you, I knew you would. I'm not finished, I cut her off. The sobbing stopped. There are conditions. This is my home, not a hotel. You and Richard will follow my rules. You will clean up after yourselves. You will be respectful of my space and my work schedule. I work from home, which means the apartment needs to be quiet during business hours. Of course, Emma. Anything, she agreed eagerly. Good, I said. Now, about Richard. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, stretching it until it was taut with her desperation. I have an opening. It's not a project manager. It's an internship. An internship? She stammered. Yes, unpaid for the first 90 days. It involves making coffee, running errands, filing paperwork, and answering the phones. He'll be reporting to my 2 employees, both of whom are 10 years younger than him. If he performs well and shows a good attitude, we can discuss a paid junior assistant position after 3 months. Those are the terms. Take it or leave it. There was a long, dead silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of Richard arguing furiously in the background. I could picture his face, red and disbelieving. The master of the universe being offered an internship. It was perfect. Finally, Jessica's voice came back, defeated and small. We'll take it, she whispered. We'll be there tomorrow. The next morning, they arrived. I heard the buzz from the lobby intercom at exactly 10 a.m. I didn't go down to help them. Part of the rules was that they were guests, not royalty. They had to figure out how to navigate the world on their own 2 feet now, starting with the front door of my building. A few minutes later, there was a hesitant knock. I opened the door and the full weight of their downfall hit me. It was my sister Jessica, my brother-in-law Richard, my father Robert, and my mother. My 2 young nieces were clinging to Jessica's legs, their eyes wide and confused. They stood in the narrow hallway of my apartment building, surrounded by a few duffel bags and cardboard boxes. No Louis Vuitton luggage, no leather briefcases. Just the cheap, practical containers of people who had to pack their lives in a hurry. Jessica looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her usually perfect hair was messy, and her eyes were red-rimmed. Richard stood behind her, his arms crossed. He wore a wrinkled polo shirt and a look of pure disgust on his face as he surveyed the hallway's peeling paint. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a crack in the floor, his shoulders slumped. My mother, however, was scanning my face. Her expression a mixture of desperation and her old, familiar judgment, as if this whole situation was somehow a reflection of my poor life choices. Come in, I said, stepping back. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. They shuffled inside, and my small 1-bedroom apartment suddenly felt suffocatingly crowded. Richard dropped a box on the floor with a thud, his gaze sweeping over my living room, which doubled as my dining room, and now their bedroom. He took in the second-hand sofa, the IKEA bookshelf, the small kitchen table where I'd built my entire business. This is it? Richard scoffed, the first words he'd spoken. This is where you live? This is it, I confirmed, my eyes locking with his. It's not a mansion on a hill, but unlike yours, it's paid for. You can stay, or you can find the nearest homeless shelter. The choice is entirely yours. Jessica shot him a panicked look. Richard, stop, please. Emma, we are so grateful. I ignored her plea and addressed them all. Let's go over the house rules one more time in person so there are no misunderstandings. I walked over to my refrigerator and pointed to a sheet of paper I'd taped there. This is the shower schedule. 1 bathroom for 5 adults and 2 children. You will have 15 minutes each in the morning. No exceptions. I have client calls starting at 8 a.m. I turned and pointed to the corner of the living room where I had inflated an air mattress. That is your sleeping area. It will be deflated and put away by 7:30 a.m. every morning. This is my living space and my workspace during the day. I continued, my voice calm and steady. A chore list is also on the fridge. It will be rotated weekly. It includes cooking, cleaning the bathroom, vacuuming, and taking out the trash. You will buy your own groceries. I will not be funding your lives." My mother let out a small, offended gasp. "Emma, we are your family. For 10 years, you treated me like a disappointment," I said, turning to face her directly. "You are here now because the golden child and her brilliant husband built their house on sand. My father, Robert, always used to say, 'A shiny roof doesn't matter if the foundation is sand.' Well, welcome to my little house built on rock. You will respect its foundation." My father flinched as if I'd struck him. He finally looked at me, and I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes before he looked away again. I turned my attention back to Richard. "As for you, your internship starts now. Your desk is that small table in the corner. There's no computer. You can use your phone for now. Your first assignment is to organize 10 years of my company's receipts into chronological order for our accountant. They are in those 4 boxes by the door." His face went pale, then turned a blotchy red. "Receipts? You want me, a man who managed a $200 million fund, to sort your hobby's receipts?" "That's right," I said. "And I don't want to hear any of your corporate buzzwords. There's no synergy to leverage here. No KPIs to optimize. There are just boxes of paper that need to be sorted. You can start now." I gestured toward the boxes. "Or you can take your family and leave. Your call." Richard stared at me, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles pulsing in his cheek. For a moment, I thought his pride would win. I thought he would grab their bags and storm out. But then he looked at Jessica, at his crying children, at the bleak reality of his situation reflected in their desperate faces. Without another word, he walked over to the first box, ripped the tape off, and sat on the floor. He pulled out a handful of crumpled receipts. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the quiet crinkling of paper as the master of the universe began his first day as an unpaid intern. I watched him for a moment, then turned and walked into my office, closing the door behind me. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. This was just the beginning. The first night was a symphony of sighs and restless shifting. From my bedroom, I could hear the strained whisper of the air mattress every time someone turned over. It was a sound of profound discomfort, a world away from the silent, memory foam luxury they were used to. I lay in my own bed, the one I'd bought with money from my own business, and felt a strange calm. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about balance. For 10 years, I had been made to feel small and uncomfortable in their world. Now they would learn what it felt like to be a guest in mine, living by rules that were not their own. The next morning, the bathroom schedule created immediate chaos. Jessica emerged after 22 minutes, her hair half-dried, a frantic look on her face. "Emma, I just needed a few more minutes for my conditioner to set." I pointed to the clock on the wall without looking up from my laptop. "You're 7 minutes into Richard's time, and you're 12 minutes into my workday." She scurried away, and I heard my mother, Carol, mutter from the living room, "This is barbaric. We're not in the army." Later that morning, I walked out to get some coffee and saw Richard sitting on the floor, surrounded by 3 piles of receipts. He wasn't sorting them. He had created a flowchart on a piece of cardboard from one of the boxes. "I've identified some key inefficiencies in your filing system," he announced, as if he were addressing a boardroom. "If we triage these receipts by vendor category first, then cross-reference by quarter, we can optimize the data entry workflow by at least 15%. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Richard, are the receipts in chronological order?" He blinked, thrown off by my simple question. "Well, no. I'm establishing a more robust operational framework first. This is about scalable solutions, not just..." They saw my Honda as a symbol of failure while my sister got a new Mercedes. What would you do if your family's judgment overshadowed your success? Comment your thoughts and share. "Sort the receipts," I said, my voice flat. "Put them in order by date. The oldest on the bottom, the newest on top. That's the only key performance indicator I care about right now." His face flushed with anger. The man who used to command conference rooms filled with powerful investors was being told how to stack paper by his disappointment of a sister-in-law. He snatched a receipt from the pile with unnecessary force, the crinkling sound echoing his frustration. The first week was a painful education for them. My mother, Carol, was assigned to cook dinner on Tuesday. She stood in my kitchen, staring at the contents of the refrigerator as if the vegetables had personally offended her. They had bought groceries, but she was used to pre-marinated meats and organic meal kits delivered to her door. She ended up burning the chicken and undercooking the rice. We all ate in silence, the taste of charcoal and failure in our mouths. My father, Robert, just pushed the food around his plate, his eyes downcast. He hadn't said more than 10 words to me since they arrived. His shame was a heavy blanket he wore at all times. On Friday, I was on a video call with a new client from California, finalizing a 6-figure branding deal. My office door was closed, but I could hear my mother's voice rising in the living room. "I don't understand why we can't just use the television. It's on all day while she's in there working." "Mom, she said it's her office. It's for her work," Jessica whispered frantically. "This is ridiculous," Carol huffed, her voice getting louder. "We are prisoners in this tiny apartment." I excused myself from the call for a moment, muted my microphone, and opened my office door. All 4 of them were there, looking like shipwreck survivors. Richard was still on the floor, though the unsorted box was now only half full. "Is there a problem?" I asked, keeping my voice level. My mother stood up, her hands on her hips. "Yes, there is a problem. Your father and I are used to watching the evening news. It's a simple comfort, Emma, something you're denying us. The library is 3 blocks away," I replied calmly. "It has a television in the community room. And free internet, Richard. You could use their computers to start looking for a job." Richard looked up from his receipts, his eyes full of venom. "And what kind of job am I supposed to get, Emma? My name is poison in the financial world. It's all over the news. I have nothing." "You have a roof over your head," I said, my eyes sweeping over all of them. "You have a family that, despite everything, took you in. What you do with that opportunity is up to you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a $100,000 contract to close. It's what pays for the roof you're also critical of." I closed the door, the click echoing in the silent apartment. I knew they heard the amount. I wanted them to. I wanted them to understand that my hobby had built the lifeboat they were all clinging to. The foundation wasn't sand. It was solid rock, and they were finally feeling its hard, unyielding surface beneath their feet. The silence that followed the click of my office door was heavier than any argument. I could feel it through the wood, a thick, suffocating pressure. I sat at my desk, took a deep breath, and unmuted my microphone. "Sorry about that. Just a small interruption," I said to my client, my voice as smooth as if I'd just been discussing the weather. We spent the next 20 minutes finalizing the details, and when I hung up, the signed contract was already in my inbox. $100,000. My hobby had just paid for their food, shelter, and water for the next year. When I finally emerged from my office an hour later, the scene in the living room had barely changed. Richard was still sitting on the floor, but he wasn't sorting receipts anymore. He was just staring at them, a single piece of paper held loosely in his hand. Jessica was on the couch, pretending to read a magazine, but I saw her knuckles were white. My parents were sitting side by side at the small dining table, not speaking, looking like 2 statues carved from disappointment. "Dinner is whatever you can find in the fridge," I announced, walking into the kitchen. "I'm ordering takeout for myself." No one answered. I could hear Jessica start to say something, then stop. The power dynamic had shifted so violently it had left them all with whiplash. For years, their power came from their money and my lack of it in their eyes. Their approval was the currency, and they had always kept me poor. Now, I was the Federal Reserve, and they were bankrupt. The next few days established a strange, tense routine. Richard sorted receipts with a grim determination, his jaw tight. My mother, Carol, refused to cook again after her chicken disaster, so Jessica took over. She tried her best, but she was used to a kitchen 3 times the size and appliances that did most of the work for her. She burned toast, made pasta that was crunchy, and looked perpetually on the verge of tears. My father, Robert, remained a ghost, moving from the couch to the table and back again, his silence a constant, weighty judgment. On Wednesday evening, as I was sketching out some new logo concepts, Richard appeared at my office doorway. He cleared his throat. "Emma," he said, his voice stripped of its usual booming confidence. "I've finished organizing the receipts for the last fiscal year." "Good," I said without looking up. "Start on the year before that." He hesitated. I was looking at your business expenses, he began, stepping into the room. Your overhead is quite low, but your client acquisition cost must be significant. Have you considered leveraging social media marketing funnels to optimize your conversion rates? We could build a scalable model. I finally looked up at him. The man who once lectured me about my fickle career was trying to apply his failed corporate jargon to my thriving business. Richard, I said, my voice dangerously calm. The last time you built a scalable model, you ended up on my floor sorting paper. Stick to the paper. His face went pale, then red. He turned without another word and walked away. I knew it was cruel, but it was a cruelty forged over a decade of his own condescending remarks. My father always said, "Real success has a return on investment you can see, Emma." I looked at Richard's retreating back. He was my father's definition of success, and right now, his only return on investment was a sorted box of receipts. Later that night, Jessica knocked softly on my door. "Can I talk to you?" she whispered. I nodded, and she slipped inside, closing the door behind her. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Emma, I know this is hard for everyone, but Mom's blood pressure medication is running low. We need to get a refill." "Okay," I said. "The pharmacy is on the corner." "We don't have any money," she mumbled, looking at the floor. "Richard's accounts are all frozen. Everything was in his name." I stared at her for a long moment. The golden child, the one who had everything, who never had to worry about a pharmacy bill. "How much is it?" "I think, with our old insurance, it was a $20 copay. I don't know what it is now." I opened my wallet and pulled out a $50 bill. I didn't hand it to her. Instead, I placed it on the corner of my desk. "I'm going to give you all a weekly allowance," I said, my voice businesslike. $200 a week, for the entire family. It's for groceries, toiletries, and any medical needs. You'll need to budget. If you run out, you'll have to wait until next week." Jessica stared at the $50 bill as if it were a snake, an allowance. We were in our 30s, our parents in their 60s, and I was giving them an allowance. It was the ultimate humiliation, the final confirmation of their dependency. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. She quickly grabbed the bill and turned to leave. As she opened the door, I saw Richard standing in the hallway. He hadn't been trying to hide. He had been listening to the whole thing. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was something else, something I hadn't seen on his face before. It looked like desperation, mixed with the terrifying glint of an idea. He looked from the money in Jessica's hand to my face, and a slow, calculating look entered his eyes. He wasn't defeated. He was cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. The next few days were quiet, but it was a heavy, suffocating kind of quiet. The house felt like it was holding its breath. Every Sunday morning, I would place $200 in cash on the kitchen counter. My mother would be the one to pick it up, never looking me in the eye, her movements quick and furtive as if she were stealing. They would huddle together. My mother, my father Robert, Jessica, and Richard, creating a shopping list with the hushed intensity of generals planning a military campaign. They'd argue in whispers about whether to buy brand-name coffee or the generic store brand. It was a pathetic sight, and a small, dark part of me enjoyed it. This was the reality they had mocked me for living in for years. Budgeting, worrying, choosing. Richard, however, began to change. After the first week, he stopped sorting papers. He found the charger to his old, scuffed laptop and set up a makeshift office at a small desk in the corner of the living room, the one I used for junk mail. He spent hours there, his back ramrod straight, typing with a furious, silent intensity. The defeated slump was gone, replaced by a chilling focus. He looked like the man I remembered from all those holidays, the one who commanded attention and believed the world owed him everything. The only difference was his suit was now a pair of worn-out sweatpants. One evening, I came downstairs to find him still at it. He didn't hear me approach. On his screen was a complex flowchart of some kind, full of boxes and arrows. He was muttering to himself. "If we reroute the primary asset stream through a holding company, we can minimize the tax liability. It's a classic restructure." He was playing his old games, just on a much smaller, imaginary scale. I cleared my throat. He slammed the laptop shut so fast the plastic groaned. "Just keeping my skills sharp," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Can't let the mind atrophy." I just nodded and went to the kitchen, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. My father, Robert, saw Richard's new work ethic as a sign of impending recovery. "The boy's a fighter," he told me one afternoon, his voice filled with pride. "You can't keep a man like Richard down for long. He's a born winner." He looked at me, and I could see the unspoken comparison in his eyes. Richard was a winner, even in ruin. I was just the provider, the utility, the disappointment who happened to have a roof and a functioning bank account. They didn't see a threat. They saw the return of their golden boy. The breaking point came a few days later. Richard got a call and had to step out onto the porch. He was so engrossed in his hushed, urgent conversation that he left his laptop open. I told myself to walk away, that it was none of my business. But I couldn't. I had a sick feeling in my stomach, a primal instinct that something was deeply wrong. I walked over to the desk, my heart thudding against my ribs. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't an imaginary business plan. It was a spreadsheet, and the title at the top was Emma Assets and Acquisition Strategy. He had listed every single client I had, names he'd clearly memorized from the invoices he'd sorted. Next to each name, he'd researched their annual revenue, their market share, and the names of their CEOs. In a final column labeled Approach Vector, he'd written notes. For my biggest client, a tech startup, he'd written, Vulnerable to synergy pitch. Leverage existing relationship via Emma to gain internal meeting. Target CEO directly with a more robust financial partnership model. Phase Emma out. He wasn't trying to get a job. He wasn't trying to rebuild his own career. He was trying to steal mine. He was using my home, eating my food, and living on my money while actively plotting to cut me out of my own business and take my clients for himself. He saw my success not as something to respect, but as a resource to be plundered. A lifeboat he could climb into by kicking me out. I clicked the spreadsheet closed and walked back to the kitchen just as he came back inside, still talking on the phone. "No, listen to me," he was saying, his voice a low, confident hum. "It's a turnkey operation with a proven client base. The founder is creatively focused. She doesn't understand the scaling potential. It's ripe for a leadership transition." He saw me, and his eyes widened for a fraction of a second before his mask of cool superiority snapped back into place. He ended the call quickly. "Just an old colleague," he said with a shrug. "Networking." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the predator my family refused to acknowledge. They were so blinded by the memory of his former success that they couldn't see the parasite that stood before them. My father's words echoed in my head, the phrase he had used to dismiss me for a decade. "Real success has a return on investment you can see, Emma." I finally understood. Richard was looking at me and my business, and all he could see was his next return on investment, and I was the one who was going to pay. I walked away from the doorway, my feet moving silently on the hardwood floor. The rage I expected to feel wasn't a hot, screaming fire. It was ice. A deep, freezing calm spread through my veins, sharpening every thought. He had called me creatively focused, a dismissal wrapped in corporate jargon. He thought my creativity was a weakness, a fluffy, unprofitable trait that made me blind to the real world of numbers and acquisitions. He was about to learn that creativity could be a weapon. My father, Robert, always said, "A fancy frame can't fix a crooked picture." He usually said it while looking at one of my early abstract designs, a clear jab at my chosen path. But now, the words settled in my mind with a new, powerful clarity. Richard was the crooked picture, and my family had spent a decade building the fanciest frame imaginable around him. The next morning, I made pancakes. It was a Saturday, and the smell of melting butter and maple syrup was a thick, cloying lie of domestic peace. I served everyone, placing a perfect stack in front of Richard. "Eat up," I said, my smile feeling like a mask I had painted on. "You need your energy for all that networking." He looked up, surprised by my good mood. "Thanks, Emma. Things are starting to look up. I have a few promising leads." Jessica beamed at him, her face full of pathetic hope. "I knew you'd bounce back, honey. You're a genius." My mother chimed in. That's wonderful news, Richard. We're all so proud of you. They were a chorus of denial, so desperate to believe in the illusion of their golden boy that they couldn't see the wolf sitting at their table, eating my food. I just kept smiling and pouring coffee. Later that day, I found him back at his makeshift desk, typing furiously. The spreadsheet was gone, replaced by a Word document titled Phoenix Proposal. He was building his narrative, the story of his triumphant return from the ashes. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Look serious," I said casually. He minimized the window, but not before I saw my biggest client's logo on the template he was using. "Just putting some feelers out," he said, turning to face me. "In this market, presentation is everything. You have to project success to attract success." "I know a little something about presentation," I said, letting the bait hang in the air. "It's literally what I do for a living." His eyes lit up with a greedy, patronizing spark. It was the exact reaction I'd hoped for. He saw an opportunity. "You know, Emma, that's true," he said, his tone shifting to one of a generous mentor. "Your design skills are impressive for your niche. What would you say to helping me out? Just a little pro bono work for family. I need a logo, a professional letterhead, something that says I'm back and more powerful than ever." He thought he was playing me, using my own skills to build the weapon he would use against me. He didn't realize I was handing him a gun with no firing pin. "I'd love to help, Richard," I said, my voice dripping with fake sincerity. "What kind of message are we trying to send?" For the next 2 days, we collaborated. It was a nauseating performance. I'd sit with him while he described his vision. He used words like synergy, disruption, and aggressive growth. I translated his empty buzzwords into sleek, modern designs. I created a logo for his new, entirely fictional consulting firm, Viridian Dynamics. I designed business cards on thick, expensive cardstock. I built a stunning presentation template, full of charts and graphs that meant absolutely nothing but looked incredibly important. I was framing the crooked picture, making it look as legitimate and appealing as possible. He was ecstatic. "This is incredible, Emma. You're a real professional," he said, holding a business card as if it were a solid gold bar. "With this, I can get a meeting anywhere." "I'm sure you can," I replied. While he was busy playing with his new corporate identity, I was making calls. I found the name of a top intellectual property lawyer in the city, a man named Mark, who specialized in creative industries. I booked a consultation. "I'm restructuring my business," I told him over the phone, my voice calm and professional. "I'm bringing on new partners and need to ensure all my client contracts and my own intellectual property are completely ironclad. I want non-disclosure agreements, non-compete clauses, and ownership terms so clear a child could understand them." Mark listened patiently. "It sounds like you're preparing for war, miss," he said, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "Let's just say I'm reinforcing the castle walls before a storm," I answered. "I've learned that some people see a thriving garden not as something to admire, but as a field to pillage." We scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. After I hung up, I looked at the beautiful empty logo I had designed for Richard. Viridian Dynamics. It sounded so official, so real, and it would be the centerpiece of his downfall. He wanted a return on investment he could see. I was about to give him one. My meeting with Mark was in a glass-walled office on the 34th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view of the city was vast and intimidating, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was on solid ground. Mark was a man in his late 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He didn't waste time with small talk. I laid out the entire situation, from my family's decade of dismissal to the spreadsheet I found on Richard's laptop. I explained the fake company, Viridian Dynamics, and the branding materials I had created for him. Mark listened without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "A classic corporate takeover strategy," he said, his voice even. "He's using your infrastructure and access to build his own pipeline. Then he'll cut you out and claim he optimized the business. It's predatory, but not technically illegal unless we make it so." He leaned forward. "Here's what we're going to do. We're not just reinforcing the castle walls. We're building a legal cage and getting him to walk into it himself." His plan was brilliant in its simplicity. He would draft a series of new service agreements for all my existing clients. These agreements would update my company's legal status, but more importantly, they would contain what he called a poison pill clause. Any individual acting as an agent, consultant, or representative of my company would be bound by an aggressive non-compete and non-solicitation agreement for a period of 5 years. The clause would specifically name my clients. If anyone tried to poach them, the financial penalties would be catastrophic, enough to bankrupt someone 10 times richer than Richard ever was. The final piece, Mark said, is a new independent contractor agreement. You'll tell him that for insurance and liability purposes, your new partners require anyone who has access to client information to sign it. We'll bury the non-compete language in dense legal text. He's so arrogant he'll think it's a formality. He won't read the fine print. I looked at the sleek logo I had designed for Viridian Dynamics on my phone. I remembered my father's words and how he used them to mock my work. A fancy frame can't fix a crooked picture. Richard was the crooked picture, and I had just commissioned the most legally binding frame ever made. I came home that evening to find a celebratory atmosphere. Jessica was cooking a steak dinner, a luxury we hadn't had since they moved in. My father, Robert, was there, a bottle of expensive red wine in his hand. "We're celebrating," Jessica announced, her face flushed with excitement. Richard was standing by the fireplace, one of my business cards for Viridian Dynamics held between his fingers. He looked smug. "I landed a meeting," he said, trying to sound casual but failing, "with the CEO of TechVantage Solutions." My blood ran cold. TechVantage was my biggest client, the one he'd marked as vulnerable to synergy pitch. "Richard, that's incredible," my father boomed, clapping him on the shoulder so hard Richard almost stumbled. "I told you! A born winner! Emma, you hear that? That's how you do business. You go straight to the top." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of pride for Richard and pity for me. "It's all about projecting confidence." Richard smiled. "The presentation materials Emma made were a huge help," he said, a king graciously thanking a court jester. "They made me look like a serious player." They all toasted to Richard's success, the clinking of their wine glasses echoing in the suddenly silent room. They were toasting my demise with my wine, in my house. I waited until after dinner, after my father had left and Jessica was upstairs putting the kids to bed. Richard was at his desk, reviewing the Phoenix proposal. This was my moment. I walked over, holding a thick document. "Richard, I'm so happy for you," I began, my voice perfectly pitched with supportive sincerity. "This is amazing news. It's actually perfect timing. I'm in the middle of a small business restructure, and my lawyer insists that anyone who consults with me, even family, needs to sign a standard independent contractor agreement. It's just for liability. Protects us both." I handed him the document Mark had emailed me an hour earlier. It was 40 pages of dense, single-spaced text. His eyes glazed over just looking at it. 40 pages? He scoffed. "What is this, a merger?" He was trying to sound like he was above such trivial paperwork. "It's mostly boilerplate stuff," I said with a shrug. "Insurance, confidentiality, that kind of thing. You can just sign on the last page." I pointed to the signature line. He barely glanced at it. His ego wouldn't allow him to admit he didn't understand it or that he should read it. He was a big-picture guy, a disruptor. Fine print was for little people. He picked up a pen. "Anything to help you legitimize things, Emma," he said with a patronizing smile. He signed his name with a flourish. The sound of the pen scratching on the paper was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a cage door swinging shut and the lock clicking into place. He had just legally forbidden himself from ever contacting my clients again, and he had no idea. The next 3 days were a masterclass in psychological theater. Richard strutted around my apartment like it was his new corner office. He practiced his pitch in front of the bathroom mirror, his voice echoing with hollow corporate buzzwords. "We're talking about a paradigm shift in client-side synergy, Jessica," he'd say to his reflection, and my sister would just nod from the doorway, her eyes shining with a desperate, manufactured pride. He treated me with the detached amusement of a CEO observing an intern. He'd ask me to fetch him coffee while he was on the phone, using the Viridian Dynamics name with a straight face, as if it were a real company and not just a JPEG I designed in an afternoon. I played my part. I was the supportive, slightly naive sister-in-law impressed by his big-shot talk. I made his favorite meals. I kept the kids quiet so he could strategize. I was a ghost in my own home, a silent stagehand preparing the set for the final act of his tragedy. He was so consumed by his own reflection, so high on the fumes of his imagined comeback, that he never once saw the trapdoor I was painting under his feet. On the morning of his meeting with TechVantage, he came downstairs wearing a new tie, a garish silk thing in a shade of blue that screamed, "I'm trying too hard." Jessica had ironed his shirt to military crispness. "Wish me luck," he said, not to me, but to the room in general. He picked up the leather portfolio I had also designed, the Viridian Dynamics logo embossed in subtle silver. "Big day. This is where the phoenix rises from the ashes." My mother called just then, her timing as perfect as ever. "Give Richard our love," she chirped through the speakerphone. "We're all praying for him." I just smiled and handed him his coffee. "Knock 'em dead, Richard." He gave me a condescending pat on the shoulder. "Thanks, Emma. Maybe you'll learn a thing or two about real business from watching me." He winked, then walked out the door, the sound of it clicking shut, echoing like a starting gun. Jessica was practically vibrating with excitement. "He's going to do it, Emma. I can feel it. We'll be back on our feet in no time." She was already planning their return to glory. I let her dream for a few more minutes before I excused myself. "I have a client call to make," I said. In my office, I closed the door and took a deep, steadying breath. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, clear certainty. I dialed my lawyer. "Mark," I said when he answered. "He's on his way there now. Are we ready?" The documents were couriered to TechVantage an hour ago. Mark's voice was calm and efficient. The CEO's office confirmed receipt. All you have to do is make the call and connect the dots for him. He'll do the rest. I thanked him and hung up. My next call was to the main line at TechVantage Solutions. "Christopher, please, it's Emma." I had worked with their CEO, Christopher, for years. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man who valued loyalty and hated games. His assistant put me right through. "Emma, good to hear from you," he said. "I was just looking over some interesting materials that arrived from your office." "That's actually why I'm calling, Christopher," I said, my voice even. "I wanted to give you some context before your 10 o'clock meeting. You see, my company is undergoing a bit of a restructure. I'm bringing on contractors to help with growth, and one of them is a man named Richard." I could hear the faint rustle of paper on his end. "Richard, yes, from a firm called Viridian Dynamics?" "That's the one," I continued smoothly. "He's my brother-in-law, and he's helping me explore new client synergies. As part of our new structure, all contractors, including Richard, are bound by a standard non-solicitation agreement. It's a formality, of course, just to protect my existing client relationships. You'll find a copy of his signed agreement in the package my lawyer sent over." There was a pause. I knew Christopher was looking at the 40-page document, looking at Richard's confident signature on the final page. I heard a low chuckle on the other end of the line. "I see," Christopher said, and the two words were filled with understanding. "He's contractually forbidden from pitching my business to anyone but you." "Precisely," I said. "I apologize for the unorthodox approach, but I felt it was important for you, as my most valued client, to have the full picture." "I appreciate the transparency, Emma," he said, his tone now one of amused respect. "Don't worry, I know how to handle this. Your business with us is secure. In fact, let's schedule a call for next week to discuss expanding our contract." We hung up, and I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. I thought of my father's sneering words from so long ago. He always said a fancy frame can't fix a crooked picture, but he was wrong. I had just built the most perfect, legally binding frame around Richard, the crookedest picture I knew, and he was about to be hung out to dry. At that exact moment, Richard was probably striding through the polished marble lobby of the TechVantage Tower, his fake portfolio tucked under his arm, a confident smile on his face, walking toward a meeting that would be the final nail in his professional coffin. The silence in my office after I hung up with Christopher was absolute. It felt like the moment after a lightning strike, when the world holds its breath waiting for the thunder. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on my wall, each second a slow, deliberate step Richard was taking toward his own execution. I didn't move. I just sat there, listening to the sound of my own quiet breathing, feeling a decade of quiet resentment solidify into a cool, hard diamond in my chest. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. About 45 minutes later, I heard the front door open. It didn't open with the confident swing of a man returning from a victory. It was a hesitant, quiet sound, followed by the soft click of the latch. Jessica must have heard it too, because I heard her footsteps hurrying down the stairs. "Richard? Honey? How did it go?" Her voice was a trembling mix of hope and anxiety. I heard a muffled thump, the sound of his expensive portfolio being dropped on the floor. There was no answer. I stood up and walked to my office doorway, leaning against the frame. Jessica was standing at the bottom of the stairs, her hands clasped together. Richard was standing by the door, his back to us. His shoulders were slumped. The garish blue tie was loosened, hanging crookedly. He looked like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. "Richard?" Jessica asked again, her voice smaller now. He turned around slowly. His face was pale, a sickly, clammy white. His eyes, usually so full of arrogant fire, were wide and blank with shock. He looked from Jessica to me, and a flicker of comprehension, followed by pure rage, ignited in their depths. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "This was you." Jessica rushed to his side. "What are you talking about? What happened?" "He wouldn't even see me," Richard said, his voice rising to a frantic pitch. "The CEO, Christopher, his assistant met me in the lobby. She said the meeting was canceled. She handed me this." He fumbled in his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the last page of the contractor agreement, the one with his flourishing signature. Circled in red ink was the non-solicitation clause. "She said if I ever contacted anyone at their company again, their legal team would be in touch. She said Emma was their valued partner, and they don't appreciate games." Jessica snatched the paper from his hand, her eyes scanning the text. She didn't understand the legal language, but she understood the red circle. She understood the look on her husband's face. She looked at me, her expression crumbling from confusion to horrified realization. "Emma, what did you do?" "I did business," I said, my voice calm and steady as I walked into the living room. "Isn't that what you, Richard, and Dad have been telling me to do for 10 years? To get a real job? To learn how real business works?" "You tricked me," Richard shouted, taking a step toward me. "That was a setup. Viridian Dynamics isn't real." "Of course it's not real," I said with a small, cold smile. "I designed the logo in 20 minutes. It was a prop, a tool, something you business guys call leveraging an asset. You were so busy projecting confidence you didn't bother to read the fine print. You were so sure you were the smartest person in the room that you signed a 40-page document without a second thought. That's not me tricking you, Richard. That's you being arrogant and sloppy." Jessica started to cry, those quiet, defeated tears I'd seen before. "But why? He was trying to help us. He was trying to help you." I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. "Help me?" He was going to poach my biggest client, cut me out, and leave me with nothing. He called them vulnerable to a synergy pitch. He was going to burn down the business I spent a decade building so he could have a little bonfire to warm his hands. He wasn't helping me. He was using me, just like you all have been for years. My phone rang then. I glanced at the screen. It was my father, Robert. Perfect timing. I put him on speaker. "Emma," his voice boomed. "How did Richard's meeting go? Your mother and I are dying to hear." "It's over, Dad," I said, my eyes locked on Richard's. "It didn't go well." "What? What happened?" "Richard tried to pitch my client behind my back and he got escorted out of the building," I said plainly. "His business career is over, for good this time." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the phone. Then, "Emma, what on earth did you do? You have to support your family." "That's what I am doing," I said. "I'm supporting myself. The family member you all called the disappointment for 10 years. The one whose hobby is now paying for your golden boy's roof and food." I looked at Richard, then at Jessica. "You know, Dad, you always told me that a fancy frame can't fix a crooked picture. You said it to mock my work. But you were wrong. I didn't fix Richard. He's as crooked as ever. I just built a frame for him. a 40-page, legally binding, ironclad frame. And now everyone can see the picture for exactly what it is. I hung up on my father. I looked at my sister and her husband, two shattered statues in the middle of my living room. "I want you out," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "I'll give you until the end of the week to pack your things and find somewhere else to go. Your safety net is closed." Jessica just sobbed, but Richard stared at me, his face a mask of hatred. He had nothing left. No money, no pride, no comeback. He was just a man in a cheap tie in a house that wasn't his. They turned and walked up the stairs without another word. The next 3 days they moved like ghosts, packing boxes in silence. On the 4th day, a beat-up moving van pulled up. I watched from my window as they loaded their lives into the back of it. My parents didn't come to help. They didn't even call back. When the van pulled away, a profound quiet settled over the house. It was my quiet, my space. I walked through the rooms, which already felt lighter, cleaner. I stood in my office, looking at the city lights twinkling outside. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like a cracked plate in the back of the cupboard. I felt like the whole damn table, strong and solid, built with my own 2 hands, and it was finally set just for one, from the cracked plate to the whole table. I built my own empire and finally kicked them out. What did you think of my ultimate victory? Subscribe for more intense stories of triumph.